So, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Priyanka, and on behalf of National Board for Quality Promotion, Quality Council of India, I welcome you once again to our session today on a very pertinent topic, which is on adopting digital safety in social distancing times. So, as we all know that in the current scenario, most of us are still working from home, and our lives have gone digital overnight. So, and in order to sync with the requirements of each other, we are depending on a lot of data on cloud. Along with that, we have now an increased use of devices like smartphones, laptops. Then there is usage of internet has also increased through the online chats and videos. So while there's an ease of working in such kind of setup, simultaneously we are also exposed to a lot of cyber risk as well. So along with physical safety, digital safety has also become very important in the current situation. So we thought it would be very relevant to have a session on this topic to throw some light on how suddenly there's an increase in the rate of cyber crimes, what are its impacts, what are the few initial steps to prevent it to ensure digital safety. And we are happy to have the presence of Dr. Karnika Seth here with us for this session today, who will be enlightening us on these aspects. A warm welcome to you, ma'am. Dr. Karnika Seth is a renowned cyber law expert, and her experience in field of cyber laws and online safety spans over 2 decades. She is practicing law at the Supreme Court of India and Delhi High Court. Dr. Seth is an accomplished author, policymaker, and educator on cyber laws. She is often consulted by and has delivered cyber safety sessions at various national and international organizations, and is also founder of not-for-profit organization by the name Foundation for Institutional Reform in Education, which is working to spread cyber awareness and online safety among citizens of India. Thank you so much, Dr. Seth, for joining us today. So not taking much time now, I would request Karnika ma'am to please take it forward.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. I think it's a great privilege and an honor to deliver this webinar today for QCI, Quality Council of India, and NBQP. It's really something which is important with what we are discussing today. And last few weeks we have witnessed a completely unprecedented scenario of COVID. And while people have been grappling with physical safety issues, we as from the law enforcement and from the law practitioners point of view, especially cyber law consultant capacity, we've seen a lot of increase in cyber crime, and that's why this webinar is very important for us to spread the word and how we can what we can do, and what are the best practices that we can adopt, whether we are a small business or a big business or a medium-sized business or even an individual. What is it that we really can do to protect ourselves in these times of crisis is what this webinar is all about. So I will try to look at, give you a perspective of the same, keeping in view that we have audience from all backgrounds today. And they could be, people from SMEs, they could be law practitioners, and likewise people from law enforcement, or even stakeholders in this whole ecosystem of cyber space. There's so much happening online, and whether it's e-commerce businesses or otherwise, each of us is affected in some way or the other at various levels. So here we start with giving you an overview of how the rise of cyber crimes has happened during the COVID time, especially. Multiple attacks we have seen grow, in the cyberspace, and whether it is phishing attacks or ransomware or fake websites, these have percolated the cyberspace, not just in India. We are looking at the entire world, not just in India. So if we see, there have been data gathered by Google and analyzed by Atlas Virtual Private Network, which indicate that phishing sites have been registered as many as, they've doubled, during this period. In fact, it's 350% rise in a registration of phishing websites. Now, obviously, what is phishing? In a nutshell, phishing really would mean a financial crime. You would have seen a lot of fake lottery scam or fake websites and fake links being sent on your social media or otherwise, which ask you to give any kind of personal information, whether it's your bank related information or your credit card information. And these are the scams, because once a person who believes who is gullible and who believes in this and gives and shares his OTP, for example, could be duped of monies. And that is exactly what is the modus operandi of a criminal when he commits or attempts to commit a phishing. So these are the websites which are fake websites, only created with a view to basically extract monies from people illegally. Now, reports have indicated of the World Economic Forum that there have been a lot of Android applications around this time, which attackers have used to access smartphone data or even encrypt devices to commit ransomware attacks. Also, there are more than 1 lakh web domains which have been created around this time, which are suspicious in nature. And prima facie, it appears that this has been done for the purposes of, again, duping people. Interpol's cybercrime threat response team has also said, basically given statements and advisories out to people. They have seen ransomware attacks even in the US, specifically aimed at targeting healthcare industry and workers who are struggling to curtail or curb COVID related infections. And infrastructures related to healthcare industry have been massively attacked even in the US. Now, if we see this slide, it shows the crimes against healthcare groups, even worldwide, not just in US, but worldwide, is on the rise. And that is as per the UN study or UN reports. And there have been warnings and advisories issued in this regard. Now, in UK itself, the new cybercrime service reports over 5,000 suspect emails in a day. So you can imagine the kind of intensity with which the cyber criminals are targeting people. Not just, I would not say this is limited to UK. As I said, this is world over, and even in India, we are witnessing a lot of rise in crimes. And as per our MHA, there were 86% rise in cyber crimes within the first few weeks of COVID, in March, April itself. So therefore, what does our Delhi police do? I mean, they have also given an advisory, and CERT has also given an advisory, CERT, Computer Emergency Response Team, and I will be also discussing those. But for the timing, this advisories by the Delhi police, you see, what the police has asked us to do is to be aware of fake links on SMSs, emails, WhatsApp, and also fake donation sites, fake vaccine sites or fake testing kits, people selling testing kits, and any kind of infected links could be found on social media. There are fake online tutorials, educational materials, therapists and astrologers, and so on and so forth. The list goes on and on. So now, what does one do in that case? One needs to report immediately if there is any suspicious website like this, or you are a victim of cybercrime, on the emergency helpline 112. And cybercrime.gov.in is the national portal where we can report this cyber crimes. So WhatsApp chatbot has also been created during these times to report any kind of malicious activity on their portals or otherwise. So now the CrowdStrike Work Security Index. This is important because I wanted to highlight this because this index really gives us the preparedness, how much businesses are prepared in India in terms of protection against cybercrime. This particular report has conveyed that decision makers in India, Australia, France, Britain, Japan, and other countries, I think it's mostly 61% of Indian business leaders, and that's a quite surprising figure for me to look at. That they are basically exposed to cybercrime, but then they are also preparing and gearing up with it because they are trying to give trainings to their task force and their people within the organization and employees and people looking after their IT to combat these attacks. So it's one of the highest indexes. 62% Indian businesses were surveyed, and they have provided additional training to their workforce during this time from the work from home scenario. Now, this brings me to the kinds of problems which are there at this point, specifically during COVID times. Ransomware, as I mentioned, world over, this is an issue. Man-in-the-middle attacks, where fake links, fake email IDs are created by a person who is an insider, maybe in the accounts division of a company, and he creates forged invoices to send to one of the parties in the contract. So the party who's paying money sends the money to a wrong account because the forged invoice says so, and that's how man-in-the-middle attacks are happening today. They're using spoofing techniques also, to create fake identities, and that is also very rampant at this point. Then snooping, interceptions through insecure video conference platforms, cheating, money loss, identity theft, stealing people's identities by again fake accounts and fake profiles, phishing, as I explained. Fake news is a huge problem. Again, how do we combat fake news? We'll be dealing with that as well. But there are tools and means to do that. And while I said say that there are even I would say official newspapers and news channels who have created a fact checker column in their websites where you can actually see if a news is fake or not. You can actually see they've declared a lot of floating news on the web and said whether this is authentic or not. Then malware attacks are very rampant. Malware attacks basically are viruses, trojans, or even keyloggers which infect people's systems or office systems. And these systems, once infected, they would be almost like a CCTV. You're giving access to a CCTV screen, because everything that you type, if a system is infected with a keylogger, is visible to the cyber criminal, the person who's infected your system. So therefore, the need to have more and more antiviruses and updated and reliable anti-spyware on your systems. That's very essential for us to look at as one of the best practices we should adopt during this time. A lot of damage and disruption because of hacking. Hacking has always been a issue, when it comes to unauthorized access of any kind of data. And that again can be done through various means. One of them being sending malware, which would infect a system. And one of them is also social engineering, because a lot of times people gullibly share information on social media, and they may even share certain videos or clips which will be steganographed. What I mean by steganographed is that they will look like a harmless music file, for example, but behind that there would be a malware or a Trojan which will infect the system and hack the system. So that is also happening. And social engineering attacks also take various forms, because a person may gullibly share OTP, for example, that could be there. As a, sometimes people are not aware, and they would be, offered, say, buy one, get one scheme or some promo code, and, they will have to share an OTP, and people gullibly, share that. And in order to recharge a phone, for example, various grounds on the basis of which they can actually fool people, and that's also quite rampant at this point. Now this brings us to the law. How does law protect us? We know the modus operandi of criminals today, a number of cyber crimes, and they're on the rise world over, at this point. So what does our Indian law say about that? Are we protected? And are we protected enough is the question. So here, if you look at the Information Technology Act in India, we have various provisions which protect us against, for example, hacking under Section 66 of the IT Act. It is punishable with imprisonment up to 3 years and fine or more. Section 66C, punishment for identity theft. Again, punishment of about 3 years of imprisonment or more, and fine. Then Section 66D punishes cheating by personation, acts of cheating by personation, by garbing a false identity. And 420 of IPC is of course, cheating. So in financial crime cases, normally these are used. Also, section 43 is important here because 43 is a contravention. When somebody unauthorizedly takes away your data or puts a virus, for example, is generally read with section 66 of our IT Act. And there's a punishment for hacking. And all the body corporates, all the, for example, banks, they take a lot of information, personal data of citizens. So their users or their consumers. So once they have taken that, they have to safeguard that information. And if they falter on the account of giving the adequate cybersecurity, and if there is a unauthorized debit in a customer's account, can very well sue for compensation to the adjudicating authority. Will file a complaint before this secretary IT, who is now the adjudicating authority at this point of every state. So one can file a complaint there and get a compensation for the same. At this point, it's important to also let you know that either there could be a hacking on the server of a bank, for example, or it could be a particular person targeting a customer, and he may not have shared any personal data or OTP, but there could be an insider attack, of some employee involvement or something of a bank. In those cases, also he can sue the bank, because a man, his monies are being debited and he hasn't got a clue how this has happened. So he can sue the bank for that. And it's important to, at that point, preserve the electronic evidence. So immediately take screenshots of the evidence, report it to the bank immediately, get the plastic card, or if it's credit card or a debit card, blocked if that has been misused. And there is a zero liability for customer if he has already informed the bank, and thereafter also there are debits being made in the same account using the same modus operandi. So you need to register a complaint immediately with the cybercrime.gov.in, the national portal for reporting cybercrime, and contact the emergency helpline 112. So with these, few steps of best practices that one can adopt is an incident response. You can safeguard a lot of trouble, yourself from a lot of trouble. And I think you can try to recover your monies also. There is another way, which is, the banking ombudsman. If you complain to the bank and the bank doesn't give you compensation back, then you can also complain to the banking ombudsman. But the IT Act prescribes, this adjudicating authority has the power to grant you compensation if you haven't been able to recover your monies. So this brings us to what are the fake donation sites at this point, which are on the web at the times of crisis when we have COVID and the lockdown scenario. There have been cases registered, by the Delhi police, where one of the forces had created a fake UPI ID for PM Cares Relief Fund, and similar fake UPI IDs have been found to be, used for various putting fake ads for donation. And these news clips you would have read and you would have seen on the web. They are quite prevalent, these fake donation sites, and it's just important to go to the official handle if you really have to of the PM Cares Relief Fund, government handle, and not go to these phishing mechanisms that these criminals are actually using to get hold of illegally the monies of people. Then comes the fake phishing websites. You see, a lot of them have been blocked also. So you can see so many of them using the word COVID-19, and people's anxieties are heightened at this point, and people are trying to click on every link which is circulated on the net just to get some new information. And that's exactly what the cyber criminals have taken advantage of. And various apps, allowing you to check COVID density of the population affected with COVID, and a lot of other news and other information relating to this has been on the web. So there have been a lot of sites which have been blocked. And if you have to research on the latest updates, the Ministry of Health is there, that website. You can go to that website, go to the WHO website. You can go to the official websites of our Indian government and only look at that information as credible, because otherwise there's a lot of activity around this COVID, which is involving a lot of fake websites. Now, during this scenario, not only the phishing has been the main, problem, particularly because, people have understood that there is no work at this point, and they are in need of money, and they're resorting to all sorts of criminal activities to get money. But there has also been the idle, people are idle at this point. Some of them are, especially the, I would say, the people with negative mindsets, they have gone into a lot of other kinds of crimes. One of them being sexual harassment of women and children. A lot of time is being spent by them on social media, trolling, stalking women and children, and using, viruses, which would be, triggering their webcams, invading their privacy. Lots of pictures and videos being, stolen from their devices, because people are downloading apps, for example, without realizing they're giving away so many permissions which are not required. If you're taking a food app, or if you're availing an educational app, you don't need to give your rights, or access to your photos and videos. And a lot of people just click on I agree and just move on, giving all access to them. So that's what you have to be very, very careful and advise others also not to do that. So once you're giving the rights and you click on the I agree button, it's like a click wrap agreement, which is legally recognized contract. So that's what many people are not aware of. But then you see, ignorance of law is no excuse. So you have to be aware of the legal repercussions of any actions, even if done by inadvertence, by somebody, can land you into trouble. So then we see a upsurge in a lot of online dating apps and matrimonial frauds during this time. Online gaming apps containing a lot of malvertising, a lot of grooming material, and the IT Act. We do have, provisions to prohibit these activities. For example, circulation or publishing of any kind of obscene content is punishable under Section 67 and 67A of IT Act. 67A grant, basically provides punishment up to 5 years of imprisonment and fine or more. So 66E is invasion of privacy by, for example, taking hidden webcams. If somebody records, obscene pictures of a woman where she has an expectation of privacy and that gets invaded. So those are also punishable with acts of about 3 years of imprisonment, fine or more. And in the IPC, again, we have provisions which prohibit and sexual harassment of women and children. Section 354C, again, cyber stalking, voyeurism, all these activities, they are offenses under our current law. And for children specifically, we have another legislation called POCSO, which is Protection of Children Against Sexual Harassment. In this time itself, we have seen the boys' locker room case. We have seen cases where the Me Too movement has led to an accusation against a particular child, and a child actually couldn't take that and landed up in committing suicide. We have seen reports in the papers of various instances, and they are very, very serious, I would say, consequences to mental health and well-being issues of children around this time, and even women who become victims of sextortion rackets or cyber stalking at the hands of these criminals. Now, the Section 67B also of IT Act, you see, bans child pornography. So any child, who is used in a picture or in a video where his obscene pictures are taken or videos formed, the creation, the browsing, downloading, seeking, publishing, transmission of child pornography is banned in India. It is again punishable with up to 5 years of imprisonment, fine or more. So that is the current law. We do have enough law in the land. You see, the problem is the enforcement. If people don't report, there is not going to be enough investigations happening, and the conviction rates will be low. And you would be actually shocked to know that we only have a conviction rate of 2 to 3% in POCSO cases. And the way the crimes have risen every year, they're doubling, and 20% rise in children-related crimes itself, we've seen. not many, I would say 200, 300 cases get decided every year in IT and cybercrime cases. Out of almost, there were 11,000 arrests made in the 2016 and 17, you had more, 32,000 or so odd cases. And how many do really reach the conviction stage? And these figures are also not real figures because there's a lot of underreporting. But I must tell you that specifically for children related crimes, it is mandatory to report sexual abuse of children online. It is not optional but mandatory under the law, POCSO law. So that's how the law is. And we have had many judgments, important judgments to protect women and children's rights in this regard. We had the Vishakha judgment talking about sexual harassment against women at workplace. Kamlesh Vaswani case regarding blocking of child porn. And a lot of social media portals are actually using DNA photo hash technology to search and track and duplication of such child porn related content online. And then we had this Justice K.S. Puttaswamy 9-judge bench case of the Honorable Supreme Court, where the right to privacy has been held to be a fundamental right under our constitution. And I must also inform you that electronic evidence of any kind, whether it's an SMS or it's a picture or if it's a message or a video, all these electronic forms of evidence are admissible in a court of law. You can take them and produce them in the court of law. There's a procedure which I'm sure the legal attorney will guide you on that. But they are something which is admissible and you can prove them as per procedures prescribed by law. So therefore, importance of having screenshots, importance of having timestamps, and saving electronic evidence, not only in printed form, but also electronically in a pen drive maybe, is very, very important. Now, this brings me to the certain advisories also. During this period, we've seen a lot of video conference apps, some of them offering free services, which are not safe to use. And there have been many advisories in this regard, specifically this one given by the certain against the Zoom video conference application. We have seen there's a new application with this updates have happened on the Zoom, which provide more secure features. But at the time when this was advisory was given, I think the updates had not happened. So they had given and issued an advisory, the certain, and this body basically looks into any kind of issues relating to cybersecurity affecting the nation or people at large. And there have been various other advisories also regarding UPI ID, fake IDs, as I explained to you earlier. And therefore, these are important and worth reading. You can go to this webpage and read more about the kind of advisories given by them, apart from the UPI ID and the secure video conference platform issues. Likewise, we've seen advisories by FBI, in I would say US, and similar issues again over there. If you see the kind of advisories which FBI has given, again, they talk about computer protection and beware, being beware of social media scams, smartphone app scams, which are on the rise, and online shopping scams, because people are buying almost everything online, especially essential items. So need to go to very secure platforms to do that, and some fake offers and on gaming and free, products, you have to be very sure of, and read consumer reviews of that particular portal before you actually purchase or buy, land up taking up a particular offer. Then in the work from home scenario, a lot of websites are allowing, you to download free software for web conferencing, or to secure your passwords, to get your data on cloud, and additional storage, they're offering, but these have to be reputed companies. If they are not reputed companies, again, you should be very careful of what free services you're using. Even for VPN, virtual private network, shouldn't be using any I would say reliable apps or services. So this is also what FBI is advising its people. And if you see this Europol report, in the newspapers have also reported that in Europol, latest developments in the criminal landscape project that the governments across Europe are also intensifying their efforts. They're trying to curb spread of not only coronavirus but also cyber crime specifically targeting public health systems. So this is not just a problem we are seeing here. As I said, this is a world issue now. Council of Europe, what advisories they have given? They have advised people not to, get into traps of phishing rackets. Again, be careful of ransomware attacks against critical infrastructures of international organizations, and basically, protecting yourselves against hacking attacks and fraudulent schemes and misinformation or fake news. These are the main highlights of, the Council of Europe advisory. You can also go to this web link of the Council of Europe and read more about this. But the crux of the whole advisory is a few of these points, which are common across various jurisdictions today. This brings us to how we can check whether there is fake news online. So obviously newspaper websites, official news handles, whether you're reading from an app or a Twitter handle or reports, you have to look at official websites of government, PIB reports, and look at WHO website, as I said, also in the Ministry of Health website, if you have to rely on those websites. Those are the ones which are credible. And you have various websites which can help you detect fake news, like the Botometer, Fact Check, Snopes, Hoaxy, MetaFact, Boom, Alt News, and you can check Google reverse image also. You will be able to see how the news has duplicated, across platforms, and how it originated and if it's fake or not. You can see many of these fact check columns in various newspapers and other news agency portals now. There's a separate column for fact check, and you will be able to see the kind of declarations that those websites make, that these are fake news. So they tell people that every day they are screening and they are letting people know that this is fake, or not. So that's another interesting way. Also, there is a very important thing I'd like to mention. Online you can use this Wayback Machine option. There is a Wayback Machine option. If you just type on Google, maybe you'll see how a particular website was, maybe last month or a year back or 6 months back. You can actually see how that website was and the kind of pages that there were. So you can check if there is a website proclaiming that this is a credible agency, news agency or something, or otherwise also a online website. You can actually check its credentials and go back and see who is the owner on whois.net. You can check that, and how that site appeared and how old it is. You go back to Time Machine and check that as well. And if you have a suspicious email or some message from someone, you can also check the IP address. Every email has an IP address, and in the header of the IP, if you go to view full header option in your email service, then you see the last IP, originating IP, it will say. So there you can, if you type that and go to IP lookup or IP search on Google, you can actually see the websites that you can use to insert that IP address and find that. So those are few tools which are actually available online, and you can check a lot of information yourself as well. Now this brings us to the online safety aspect of compliance. You see, any industry needs some standardization for compliance, and this compliance that we are talking about here is the compliance in terms of cyber security of businesses. ISO 27001 by far has been a very important standard, and most cyber companies using IT have this ISO 27001, specifically those which are collecting information data from people. So we have a lot of these would say interesting risk assessment and various infrastructural I would say guidelines there, and you can actually use that ISO 27001 to protect yourself as an important standard. Then we have other industry standards also, which will apply to you in the case that you're from a particular industry, like the PCI DSS standard for payment gateways. They adopt that. Credit card, ATMs, companies, you have PCDISS standard. You have to be compliant with that. And HIPAA for health records, health industry. So that is a standard. FINRA for financial industry standard. GDPR for data protection. And in Europe, this is already applied now, and it's in full force. The GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulations, they are basically aimed at safeguarding what information is collected from people, how it is processed, the right to update information, the right to be forgotten, the right to delete information, and retention period, how much it should be retained for. And like GDPR, in India also we have the right to privacy is there. As I said, this fundamental right. We have sections 43, 43A, 66 to protect us against hacking attempts and stealth of data. But at the same time, we are also having, we are in the process of getting a new law in the country, which is the Personal Data Protection Bill. And it mirrors the penalties under GDPR, So up to 15 crores of rupees of fine for a violation, and 4% global turnover. That can be the penalty, level of penalties there if unauthorizedly certain data are collected, or which are not required, which are not mandated for a particular service. There has to be explicit consent by a user. There will be a data protection authority which will be looking into the implementation of the same, and there will be even if a user gives an explicit consent, there has to transfer, say, data abroad or save it in a server abroad. The very critical data like health records will have to stay in India. Most probably that will be the final shape of the act. And only with the permission of the Data Protection Authority will this information, which is non-critical, go out of India. So those are the kind of issues we've seen: localization and delocalization issues being discussed in regards to the PDP bill. So we are hoping this law will also come, and these standards are therefore very important because they help in protecting and securing the systems in such a way that our cybersecurity remains robust. There are various cybersecurity frameworks across the world, and by far in India we've used a lot of ISO, IEC standards itself. And most rampantly used in India is the 27001, specifically regards to the cybersecurity paradigm, and the current law, the IT Act also, the rules for reasonable security practices, to safeguard information, recommend that as one of the, recommends this ISO 27001 as one of the important standards that one can adopt. Even otherwise, apart from this standard, if there are contractual clauses between two parties and they are good enough, that is also something which is, if an industry association agrees to that and the government gives a approval, that can also be adopted. So that it depends how, what kind of parameter you're choosing, whether it's based on a contract the two parties decide, or it's the ISO 27001, or associations regulations which are approved by the government. Those can also suffice in fulfilling the requirement of maintaining reasonable security practices. This brings us to the cyber safety checklist. Why Interpol? Now, if you look at what Interpol also has to say, again, the same kind of important advisories by the Interpol, like backup of the online and offline files that you have, strengthening the home network, because a lot of people use Wi-Fi systems which may not be secure. Then using strong passwords, keeping the software updated, patches updated, managing your entire data, avoiding using any kind of, I would say downloading any data which you feel is suspicious, or a link which is suspicious. So you can see a lot of these points which we've already discussed are also part of the slide here. So this is exactly what law enforcement agencies across the world are advising people, whether it's India or it's UK, US, Europe. We see similar best practices prevalent in, and being given by most advisory bodies, government bodies looking to combat cybercrime. Now, this is also an interesting slide by the National Cyber Security Center. And if you see, how they are advising people, number one is the user, education. So how much training are we giving to people is important. And once we have educated our users against phishing attacks and other things, there are other protections they are also advising: the malware protection, network perimeter defenses, how we can block malicious emails, password policies, to prevent easy guessing of passwords, securing the configuration, basically restricting the system functionality. So only critical files to be accessed only by those people who will be operating on those files, and not necessarily open to all, sort of a scenario. Patch management also is highlighted, monitoring and analyzing all network activity. Deployment of, for example, DLPs, which is data loss prevention software. So there is an alert, in real time if there is some data which is crucial and has been stolen. Malware protection, protecting the gateways using firewalls, securing the configuration, removing unnecessary software and default user accounts. Then user access has to be well maintained. Good controls to restrict the applications and data that users can access. Again, training and device controls. Devices within the internal gateway should be used to prevent unauthorized access. So this is again very important. And use of VPNs, virtual private networks. How that can safeguard you. We will just come to that in a diagram which I'd like to show you. But once if it's on a VPN, then certainly you have a better I would say protection of your data, because your location, your IP also gets encrypted, and the data as well. So that's important. And once there is a breach, you need to have an immediate incident response and a resilience mechanism to come back and into the recovery mode. So all these are the steps which even National Cyber Security Center has advised. This is also there in UK. And for India, if we see the best practices, I had culled out a few important pointers which I felt were also applicable to our Indian scenario. For example, if you see the model that we follow, the 7-layer model in which security is to be maintained, the OSI model, then we see at various nodes, at various levels, we need to maintain security. So if we look at that, right at the network level, or right at the particular application level, how we can secure ourselves. So let us see a few pointers. One is to use a robust Wi-Fi, a WPA2 or a 3, and turning the Wi-Fi Bluetooth off when not in use. I've often seen that people are using some Bluetooth to transfer data, and otherwise they forget to put it off. So that's important. And keeping the application software and OS updated, deploying antiviruses, anti-spyware, and just thinking before you click on an I agree button. That's very essential. And reading the terms of use before you agreeing to a particular service on the web. Using digital signatures, a lot of companies are offering that, TCS and a lot of other companies, you can actually choose any of them. That's a secure electronic record. So once you want to e-contract also, you can do that, and a legally valid contract will come into being under Section 10A of the IT Act. So use digital signatures. Keeping passwords secure, use a password manager. Using two-factor authentication, keeping OTP secret, and paying on HTTPS sites and registering for blank alerts. Now, these are some of the interesting, important tips that I can offer at this point. And the best practices in the work from home culture, you're all, enough time and where you're actually beginning to go back to your offices, but then certain people, certain strength of people are still working from home. So when we have that scenario still into picture, we have to prepare a work from home policy, an IT policy. Using a VPN will help, a virtual private network, because it will encrypt your IP as well as your data, which will go to the recipient, and it works in a secure manner. So though it's a public, cyberspace is devoid of all borders, and anyone can access any websites. But with a VPN, it's like having a private office and a private interconnectivity, which is secure. So even though you're using internet, you may be sitting far, but if you have a VPN, you're in a secure environment. Using data loss prevention softwares is also recommended. Again, it will, in real time, it will give you an alert if any data protocols are being violated or breached by any employee. I discourage strongly use of personal devices during work from home, for official work, because that can land you into trouble. So it's always better if you have a choice to, keep your official data and your devices separate from your personal data and devices. A lot of surveys have been conducted, and one of the surveys I refer to during this presentation also highlights that a lot of the projectors are actually using their personal devices around this time. So that is something you have to be very careful of, and try to abide by all the IT policy and social media policies that you have, or the work from home policy of your organization. So that's important. And if you don't have these policies, I urge your organizations, you should actually start framing. And we've actually done that a lot of updations in the current, the existent policies has been, happening around this time. We had to actually do a lot of overhauling in terms of the whole work culture has changed. So the policies also had to be tweaked around this time. And a lot of companies who don't have, they actually started asking for a proper policy to be made. That's a good sign. So that's something that is in the need of the hour now. Then sensitive systems and data have to be given restricted access. Crisis management and incident response plans have to be in place. And very interestingly, there was a case which we handled lately there, where the issue was whether the confidentiality and non-compete agreements were valid, because during the work from home scenario, some of those had expired for certain companies. So there they have to I would say, sign those with their employees, or with the vendors in certain cases. So need to see whether the existing agreements are also valid as on date or not. If you're developing an IP, then the IP protections have to be there. The new agreements which will have to be made, registration of copyright, registration of trademarks, even patents for that matter of fact. If some new IP is developed, then protection of the same during the work from home environment also should go, should happen. So it should not be kept for later. Protection for designs. So while the work is going on, all those things are also compliances, and paperwork needs to be done simultaneously. Regular backups of data, regular audits of systems and data, keeping emergency response in order. That is informing your particular task force in the or assigned department in your office. If some incident occurs, or even something suspicious occurs, you need to inform the department and follow the policy guidelines basically. So this on the right hand side, you're seeing a particular diagram which talks about mission critical assets. So as I said, very critical assets have to be kept in security. Data security is to be maintained. User accounts have to be kept in order. Application security, what applications are licensed, only those have to be used. Endpoint security, your endpoint devices have to be properly secured. Networks have to be secured through firewalls and other mechanisms. And perimeter security and human layer. So you can see social engineering attacks have to be averted at the human level. So various levels of security paradigm to be followed during the work from home scenario. So you can't afford to miss out on any of these layers, and all of them are important in terms of securing your businesses, your organization. Using encryption, PKI cryptography, as I said, digital signatures is a good way. Then you are also able to use, if you're using Apple, there's a file vault for encryption, and Microsoft, you have a BitLocker. Then you have a password manager that you can use to manage all the different passwords you may have across various platforms. It will keep it in an encrypted and safe manner. Give cyber awareness trainings, that's important. Using VPNs and good reliable video conferencing apps, and having the policies in order, ensuring confidentiality of the agreements and licenses are valid or not. Even the ISOs that you have, there are licenses may be valid for 3 years. You have to see that everything is in order, the compliances are done. That's important. Following RBI guidelines, if you're into, for example, Payment and Settlements Act, you have to follow the act and the guidelines, whether you're in, operating from your office premises or work from home culture. So this is just what is VPN. If you look at what is VPN here, the connectivity is there maintained through secure channels, and while your data also remains protected, your identity also remains protected through the VPN, because a new IP is generated, your actual IP doesn't highlight there. So that's important. And a DLP will help you curb any kind of loss of data. So especially the people who are handling sensitive data, employees in the work from home scenario, if the DLP is there and official emails are being used, then nothing will go out of the system, so the monitoring can take place. This is another interesting, slide which talks about the network security, malware prevention, having a policy to control access to removable media. So a lot of companies don't allow pen drives. A lot of companies don't allow, CDs to be used for official work. And those protocols which we follow in our office will have to be also followed on the devices that we are, maintaining at home. So if you're taking a backup for yourself, that has to be authorized in an authorized manner and on the authorized devices. So that's something, if you need to take a permission, then you have to follow that route which is given in your policy mandate. So all these aspects are important. Securing the patches, maintaining user privileges, incident management, establishing monitoring strategy, because in IT law we have deemed liability of directors. So directors are actually liable for effective management of a company, are liable if there is a crime committed using their systems or their office email IDs, for example. So you have to maintain your monitoring practices so that you can prove if supposedly something happens, you should not get a vicarious liability, because you either you have to prove that there was no knowledge of the cybercrime being committed, or you had no intention to commit a crime. So your monitoring practices were in order, and therefore your onus can be discharged that yes, I have taken full care during this time that my employees are using my policies which are given in the office, and we had put whatever protocols were actually possible during this time. So therefore, this red flag, you need to ensure that you are doing enough to protect yourself also against crimes which are committed by others who may be working for your organization. Criminal liability normally doesn't happen in vicarious terms, because it is a personal liability, but there could be a vicarious liability. You might have to pay compensation to somebody because of something committed by an employee. It depends on the facts of every case. So it's best to keep your fine tune your strategy to minimize your immunity. Also, a lot of companies are taking cyber insurance. In the times of data protection, in times of AI, big data, where data aggregations and data mining are happening, a lot of companies are into gathering a lot of profiling of people and mining of data of people. While I say that is a part and parcel of cyber culture of today, yet to immunize yourself from hacking attempts or any kind of imputations that you're taking more than what is necessary in terms of data, it's always good to have insurance. It's a good cyber insurance from a good company. So in the end, you see this 16 steps are there. You see, right from hosting secure hosting to system security, multi-factor authentication, inbound email security, backing up your records, gateway security, local network security, user access controls, endpoint protections, advanced threat analytics, end-to-end encryption of data, mobile device management, and your internal IT network management, user training, monthly vulnerability scanning, monitoring, that's what I said, audits, and compliances of paperwork, GDPR compliance. So many of these aspects are highlighted in this slide, and that's why I find this very useful for a good reference, to protect your businesses. So in the end, in case still something happens, despite taking all the precautions, you have this cybercrime.gov.in, immediately report, any kind of attacks or crimes committed on your on an individual level or official level to this, so that you have a record of this whole incident, and investigation takes place. So I feel that in the end, if you talk about the way cyber safety plays, what role it plays in today in our lives, in today's times, it doesn't not only is a crucial part of any business. Cybersecurity safety has become an indispensable part of our mental health and well-being. That's how I look at it, because I've seen it affect a lot of people, even kids. Online schooling is at this point the only means by which they're learning and sharing, and it has become a very important part, to control screen time, to use filters to see that they don't access inappropriate content. And likewise for businesses, cyber safety is a huge task, and important in the agenda for every business and every individual, to safeguard their reputation, to safeguard their data they handle, and the business and the trade secrets they may have. So it's become a part and parcel of the way we live. So we can't afford to ignore it anymore. And therefore, thanks to QCI, the Quality Council of India, and NBQP for organizing this webinar. I particularly thank Priyanka, Shruti, and Ashutosh for organizing this, putting this webinar together with the entire corporate team of the QCI. At this point, I think I would be very happy to answer any questions if you have any. I will stop share of my screen.
Yes, ma'am, you can unshare your screen now. So thank you so much for such a comprehensive session on the digital hygiene and the best practices that the individuals and the organization can follow now. We will now open up for the questions. So there are a few queries by the participant that they would like to ask you. So I'll go one by one. So Mr. Arun Gupta is asking if there is any method to verify the reliability of antivirus before it is installed, and what is the most versatile antivirus strong enough to save the users from all the possible and worst threats?
You see, there are different companies giving, antiviruses and anti-spywares. Most of their features are given on their websites. If you can go through, I wouldn't, only pinpoint one vendor, but there's so many of them. Norton has, then Quick Heal has, and Kaspersky has, and a lot of other, good vendors. So why don't you go and look at their website and see the, best coverage that they can give you, because some of them may be only an antivirus, but most of them have shifted to anti-spyware, because viruses are not alone the ones which are infecting systems. So a comprehensive package of any of these good reputed companies should be helpful. But then the practice should be to critical scan your systems depending on how important your role is in the organization and how sensitive data you actually store. You need to use and scan your systems in a very regular manner, very regularly, maybe once a day, or once in 2 days at least. That is a bare minimum I can suggest.
Okay, I think that was helpful. Another question is from Facts Asia. They're asking, like, in case any online fraud happens, is there any time limit with which we can raise the complaint with the cyber cell?
No, there is no time limit. The more, I would say, any cybercrime happens, you're aware of it, immediately you should report, because it's for your protection. So if you report immediately, it's best. So that is the earliest point in time that you can report, or you are able to report, is the time frame. There is no minimum time frame as such that we say, because there are a lot of offenses which happen and people are not able to report immediately. They should be able to report it at the earliest opportunity.
Okay. Next one is from Mr. VN Chaudhary. He's asking how safe is Paytm, UPI, these online transaction apps?
We see main problems are happening because of the social engineering attacks, as I said. I have dealt with a few cases in the past. One of them, recent ones and very rampant ones in the Noida NCR area, was there were calls, phishing calls by somebody, who was pretending to be an army officer, ex-army officer, and he was, calling people from the dental industry, the health industry, to for example, somebody has put up an ad to sell a dental chair. So he would call and ask for the details of the chair and wants to pay money through one of these apps. So there was a QR code scanning which you ask the to seller to share, and once that was shared, the message flashed on the screen of the seller was pay say 25,000 rupees. So the person who was selling actually thought this dental chair actually thought that he would receive the monies. Instead of receiving the monies, the debits happened. So these are all social engineering attacks, even though most of these I would say apps have put in place some secure protocols, but people are not well versed with how to use them properly. Often they share OTP, often they fall in the trap of such criminals, and because of that these problems have occurred. So it's better to maintain prudence and know what to share and what not to share, so that is what is important.
Okay. Mr. Mukesh Vadgama is asking, as there is no security of our information which is provided by us to the bank, because private agencies are usually getting the information and are actually communicating with the people. So what is the system that should be followed for that?
Could you please repeat your question, Priyanka? I couldn't follow the question.
Yeah, the question is, as there is no security of our information provided to the bank by us, because private agencies are the mediators and they are usually collecting and communicating with us for the required information.
So
So
the
if
bank, yeah, the banks are liable. You see, if that is, if they have hired an agency to do verification or a KYC or something, then they are liable because your contract is with the bank, and you should ensure that when you read the terms and conditions, in fine print, the liability bank takes the onus on that account, that whatever information they are collecting will be secure. Somehow, even if they try to disclaim their liability, the law protects you, because such agreement terms will be invalid, constitutionally invalid, also contractually invalid, if brought to if brought about in a dispute in a court of law. Because if they try to rely on this, it will be invalid, because your data is protected under the IT Act. In section 43A I was talking to you about, they are collecting data under that. So if they follow the reasonable security practices, they have to follow that, and this should be one of the important parts of the same, because if they are collecting data through an agency, they ought to protect it also in compliance with the law. If they falter on that account, the bank is liable.
okay. The next question is from Ashutosh. That is also like somewhat similar. Like if someone is committing cyber fraud using some third party app like PhonePe, GPay, etc. So does the third party app and the intermediary websites also become liable for the crime?
See, intermediary websites or third party apps will be liable if they have not complied with the security parameters, and there is a lapse on the part in terms of negligence or intentional acts. So if they have breached the security parameters they ought to give you, then there is a liability on their account to pay you compensation. If they have deliberately caused a fraud, again they are liable to pay you. Also, they are criminally liable, under law. So section 79 of the IT Act is regarding liability of intermediaries, and there most social media platforms, if supposingly somebody puts a illegal post, or something defamatory also, they have to block it within 36 hours timeline. So if you suffer something which is or you see there's some illegality happening on their platform, whether it is phishing attack or anything else, you have to inform them. They have to revert within 36 hours. Otherwise, if they don't take action on that, they are liable, as per law. So whether it is compensation or whether it is criminal liability will depend on whether they knew about it and they failed to take action, were they negligent. All these parameters are looked into before a final decision is arrived at.
Okay. So Ms. Juhi Chaturvedi wants you to elaborate a little bit on snooping with relevant examples, if any.
Yeah, snooping is basically, you're trying to listen to, for example, somebody's conversations. There is an illegal surveillance happening. Also, so there are various ways in which that could be done, either through a hidden webcam. It could be done through an app which contains a virus. It could be through a keylogger. As I explained, that various tools and software are there which enable one to commit those kind of crimes. So there would be a clear invasion of privacy, if that happens. So that's why you have the right to actually claim for infringement if that happens, and ask for compensation, and also criminal remedies there. So you can actually complain to the police, and there would be a legal action taken on that account. That's how the law is at the moment.
Okay, next question by Mr. Venkat Swami Ramesh and Mr. Banerjee. In case of fake donation sites, what are the needful action that should be taken by any victim who loses his money by any of the banking frauds? In case the cybercrime cell and the bank is not taking any serious steps, what are the next steps that are advisable?
Okay, so as I said, there is a banking ombudsman also, who's an authority, who looks into disputes relating to customers and banks. And if there is a breach of RBI mandate, RBI could be contacted. Also, the adjudicating authority, is the main authority who looks into compensations to be provided to people in case of unauthorized debits into a bank account. So there are various, legal recourse available, and depending on the evidence that you have and what facts have come about, one can pursue a proper course of action.
Okay. Next question by Mr. Shankar Ariyar and Mr. Jitendra Mathur. Both of them are alike. What type of web meeting tool is secure and how? And is there any Indian site for video conferencing and that is suggested to be safe?
See, most of these video conference portals, they have now got enough security parameters in place. Initially, when the COVID started, there were a lot of vulnerabilities in various apps, and not many features were available. But by far now, most of them have. I wouldn't recommend a one particular service, but there are so many good platforms available. There's GoToMeeting. There is also, there's Cisco WebEx and many other, Zoom is there now with new features. So you can see, which option you'd like to take. But one feature which I particularly like is the lock meeting room feature, because nobody can enter your meeting once you have started a meeting. So that's a good feature. If any of the platforms has that, it's advisable. That is a good option. Also, when they ask you for permissions to allow access to audio and camera, they shouldn't be asking more than that, because if or maybe at the most screen share. But if for you to use the presentation or otherwise, but if they're asking for more access, then this is a suspicious video conference app in that case. So be careful of in all these issues which I've just discussed.
Okay. Next question again from Jitendra sir. Like Arogya Setu app needs our Bluetooth to be enabled. So do you have any recommendations for that? Like if there is any possibility of data getting hacked by that?
See, there is a unique ID, of a user, which is created when a customer takes or a particular citizen takes up this app, and real credentials are not really shown to other people. It's encrypted form, and it's kept it for a very short duration, only for the purposes of health and safety. So it's not really something which is susceptible to hacking as such, or prone to that. But nothing is foolproof, you see. In IoT world, all you can do is make the best use of technology to secure the platforms. So in today's world, we have encryption as the best way that we are trying to do so, and this has that encryption there. So that's what I can say, that the personal details of a person are not really visible to others. It is only encrypted, and only for the purposes of allowing him to see what is the distance from another COVID patient, which may be in that area. And
Okay.
also, one more aspect of that is that you can choose to withdraw your consent, and you can actually delete your entire record from there if you want to. So if somebody doesn't want to have that access given to that app, you can actually delete it. And as per the law of the land, I mean, they have to abide by that. So whatever footprint is there will go from there. That is possible.
Okay, these are some helpful steps indeed. Okay, next question is from Emacs Education, Emacs India. Like many times we get calls from like unidentified entities, and they say that they are speaking from the bank, but they might actually be frauds. So, like what measures like we can take in order to identify such kind of calls?
You see, most banks have relationship managers assigned to customers, especially if it's a business. They would know who's the relationship manager. I would normally, if you receive any of these calls, I would normally not share any details by anybody who's calling up to verify any of my details. So that's what we need to do. We shouldn't be sharing anything, much less the OTP. I mean, that's something which you should just not share. Even your details of when you formed the account, or your debit card numbers or credit card numbers, is something that you shouldn't be sharing with anybody who pretends to be calling you for any kind of verifications, because banks, credible banks, reputed banks, don't engage in that practice at all, and they say so in their even on their invoices or on the bank statements. The credible banks, they actually, reputed banks, give these warnings that never will somebody contact you, on phone asking you for your personal details. That's how you should be adopting safety tips, basically.
Okay, one of our participants is asking to throw some light on the data protection law.
Yeah, so we were discussing that during the course of the presentation, but this PDP bill, as I discussed, is very important, because it will ensure that any of these apps or service providers take only that information which is necessary. For example, I was sharing the other day that I was downloading a food app, and it asked me for my phone contact details and videos and photos, which was not necessary to give. So I declined the request. Sometimes such apps will not allow you to proceed without these consents. That should raise an alarm, because those are phishing apps. And if they allow you to register even without that permission, then it should be okay, because only the location details should be given at that point, and that also only while using the app. So if I want to order food and my location has to be seen, then to provide me the service, only then should I give that detail out. Otherwise, I should not allow that to happen. So the PDP bill will basically protect, in such a scenario also, where what information is collected, how it is processed, with whom is it shared, for how long is it kept, and do we have a right to withdraw our consent, update our details, or delete our data entirely. The whole entire paradigm is ensured, is kept secure. And if there is a breach, there are high and serious penalties for that. So that is why we are looking forward to having that law. It's not that we don't have privacy law in the country right now, but it will give it a clear blueprint. That is what is the need of the hour.
Okay, I think we can take our last question now by Mr. VN Chaudhary. He's
Mm-hmm.
asking, our digital marketing website a security risk?
Digital marketing websites. Now depends what exactly we mean by that. When we say digital marketing, it could be sending emailers, it could be sharing your contact details with the marketing team to send out any kind of maybe social media posts. Digital marketing is a huge area in itself. So whatever data you're sharing is if it's sensitive. For example, if there are 100 clients I serve, then 100 clients data will have maybe 100 CEOs numbers. Obviously, while sharing that, I mean, nobody would be so comfortable unless there's a clear, airtight agreement to bind this company from not sharing the data with anybody. So, other use of technology could be there, that take on this control from your end and use their servers. But then again, once the servers are theirs, then obviously there is a risk that they will know. So it is dependent on the platform, what service they're providing and what data you're sharing, which will determine the risk factor, and how you've plugged that risk is important. So legal contracts have to be formed which are airtight to ensure that there is no data loss. Also, there should be a consent from a lot of times people don't take consent, specifically in the health industry. There are a lot of e-portals coming up, a lot of apps coming up today, but have they taken a consent from their consumers, that patients, that their data would be put up on an app? I feel that is essential, because if they're doing that without taking a permission, it could land them into trouble. So therefore, legal contracts, legal compliances have to be in order while every website's terms of services are there. The contract arrangement between two vendors, the client and the vendor, is also important. What terms they are highlighting on the website is also important. So all these factors have to be looked into, and legal advice is needed in this regard.
So ma'am, I have one more interesting question that has just come up. I think it would be like significant to take it up. Like this is from Ramaben Mawani, and she's saying that recently they received a complaint for online fraud money taken, but product was not delivered. So what is the first step for complaint, and how do they find the website owner, the fraudster, who is responsible for that?
So, as I said, there are a lot of fake websites. So, if you've bought something from a website which is not genuine, then obviously you need to report to the police also. You need to see if it's an online shopping mall, then that shopping mall needs to be informed. If it's Amazon or some other portal, whichever portal you're using, those need to be, report abuse has to be given, and a report of that account. And if it's single owned, like a retail, then you need to just check the website, who is the owner. Sometimes you get the details by going to whois.net, as I said, but sometimes they are guarded by privacy policies, so the real owner's name and details are not given there. In that case, you have to report a police complaint, and you can probably check from the time machine how old that site is, and some more information by tracking the site and their credentials and other details online, maybe consumer reviews. But a holistic investigation is needed in such a crime if something like this has happened. So that's important. Yeah. It's best to take legal advice. I don't recommend you to jump into something, but yes, you can certainly inform the police. There are forensic ways to check any kind of frauds, and gather more information about a particular fraud by your own self. But it's always better to have proper, cyber experts advice or a legal advice for such crimes.
Okay, let us take one more. Like, what is the protocol for recording phone calls? Are they allowed under cyber laws?
Yeah, you can record phone calls, and specifically, a lot of sextortion cases or otherwise, they have been video clips and recorded online conversations on using VoIP, and those have been helpful, in producing evidence in the court of law. And illegally procured evidence is also admissible in a court of law. So how you have taken that is not material when it comes to proving any kind of electronic evidence in a court of law. So you can record.
Okay, ma'am, there are a host of other queries, but time being a concern, I think we can address the rest of them offline. We'll send you separately those queries. So very much thank you, ma'am. So we will conclude this session now, and I would like to thank Dr. Seth for presenting a very detailed session, taking up the queries of the participants and primarily spreading the awareness around such an important topic. I think a lot of us now will be safeguarded from the misinterpretation of the information, the fake news, websites, and the other important aspects as mentioned by you today. So special thanks also to our participants for taking out time and attending this session. And we are sure that you all must have benefited and the session was very much fruitful for you. So please do provide us your feedback. We will be sending you a form today after this session. And we have some other interesting webinars coming up next week also, details of which we will be sending you again. So thanks again, and we will end this session now. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you. Express my gratitude to QCI for organizing this webinar. And I look forward to having more sessions with you. Thank you all participants, and thank you QCI.
Thank you, ma'am.